Hello again, welcome back to GIT335 Computer Systems Technology. I once again am your instructor, Nicholas Lindquist, and today we're going to be delving into communications, networks, and cyber threats, which is Chapter 6 in your textbook. We will be covering networks, wired and wireless data, and cyber threats, security, and privacy issues. As we touched on briefly in the first chapter, the concept of digital convergence is the gradual merger and consolidation of different mediums of computing and communications into a brand new information environment. This has been brought on by the prevalence of the internet, in that we used to have many different industries, broadcasting, telephone, etc., and now the internet is compressing all of these things and permeating each of those industries and creating a new super media delivery vessel, in that we have smartphones that are online, we have TVs that are online, everything, all of our electronics are going online and creating a new information environment. So the two different types of signals are digital and analog. And as we said, a digital signal is a 0 or a 1. It is what is called a two-state system, in that there are only two possible states, the 0 and the 1. The exception to that would be a quantum computer, which is capable of reading a 0 and a 1 and a quantum superposition of a 0 and a 1 at the same time. And that one small extra super character that it can understand makes it exponentially faster than a typical computer. And an analog signal, which is a wave, and in that a digital signal is off, on, the wave is always on, it's just at different points, different frequencies. And then the more frequent the wave, the higher the frequency. But the important part to remember is that it never stops. The wave continues. It just goes up and down to different points, different frequencies. Then on this next slide, we see a modem, or a demodulating device. A modem takes analog signals and makes them digital, and it does the opposite in reverse. It also takes digital signals and makes them analog. And the primary use for this is sending computer data over analog telephone lines, and the reverse, and getting analog signals into a digital binary format that your computer can understand. That is the purpose of a modem. So here is a graphic demonstrating those signals. As you can see, the digital signal 01 is either on or off, and the analog signal is in a constant state of fluctuation, but there is no break in it. Moving on and delving into networks. As we see here, a network is defined as a system of interconnected computers, telephones, and/or other communication devices that communicate with one another and share applications and data. There are many different benefits to networks. Sharing of peripheral devices, such as printers, scanners, and disk drives. This just makes good sense. In a work environment, you don't want every employee to have their own printer. You don't want every employee to have their own scanner. There's also network storage drives, NAS network storage, in that so each employee can access files that they need from that file server. Sharing of software, sharing data and information, better communications such as email, accessing databases, centralized communications, and of course overall security of information because of improved backup systems. So here are some of the many types of networks. We have WANs, MANs, and LANs. The easiest way to remember these, a wide area network would be, an example would be the internet itself. So the internet itself is a WAN. And then we have a MAN, which is a communications network, a metropolitan area network, which would be defined as a communication network covering a city or a suburb. The M is for metropolitan. And then a local area network could be of any size. It could be as small as 2 computers connected by an Ethernet cable. A good example of this would be like a home area network, or that one office area network. So here are different types of network architecture. The first is the client-server network, and this is the one that we've already discussed, in that most of the computers on that network are clients, and they send their requests for data to the servers, and the servers accept and respond to those requests with the files that the clients are requesting. A good way to remember this is the client, any number of clients walk into a restaurant and sit down and they ask the server, tell them what they want, and the server goes and retrieves it, making the clients very happy by filling them up with food or digital data, whatever it might be. And then peer-to-peer is different in that there is no server. It's a potluck of sorts, and that information flows and is exchanged through all the different peers on that network. Intranets, extranets, and VPNs are walled-off sections of the internet. An intranet is protected by a firewall, and a corporation or a business might have this. It's for exclusively internal communication. It uses, behind a firewall, it uses the same format, it uses the same protocols of the internet itself, except it's walled off from the rest of the internet. An extranet is similar, except that it allows for vendors, suppliers, other clients to access that private network. And this is done through VPNs, or virtual private networks, creates a connection to that private network from outside of it. So the example would be here at ASU, we have an ASU network, and sensitive ASU web services and that sort of thing can only be accessed from on the ASU network. However, if your computer has a VPN client, you can create a virtual private network between ASU and your home so that you can access those services at home. And then, as we said, a firewall is the most descriptive term in computing that I can think of, and it's just a perfect description for what it actually is. So it's a piece of computer hardware or software that protects the system from any outside intruders. Different network components. A network can consist of either wired or wireless connections, and it consists of hosts and nodes. There is only one host in the network, and then a number of different nodes connect to it using different network topologies, which we'll get to in just a second. A packet, as we said, is the smallest amount of information that can be shared on a network. The packet consists of the header and the payload, which is can be compared to an envelope with the address written on the outside, to and from, which would be the header, and then the payload is actually the letter that's inside. And then a protocol is an agreement between two devices when they connect on how they're going to exchange information. That's why it's called a, oops, I'm getting ahead of myself. A protocol is like TCP/IP. It's the language, the rules for communication that is established between two or more machines, between two or more computers that wish to connect and communicate with each other. The standards for communication between those devices. So when two devices connect, they exchange a digital handshake, which specifies the protocol that they will be using and the compatibility and the speed of transmission between the two. Of course, they have to establish a common language, and they must also establish the rate of transmission of data transmission, and they must both agree and accept to exchange data at the lowest common denominator between those two so that they can both keep up. Here are some different network linking devices. A switch connects computers to a network, sends only to intended recipients back and forth at the same time. A switch is kind of a dumbed-down version of a router in that it does not actually create IP addresses and direct traffic. It merely connects additional computers to a network. A bridge is an interface device that connects the same type of networks in different places. An example would be we have a bridge here that connects our video conferencing system on the West Campus to the video conferencing system in TMP and the video conferencing system in Polytechnic. So what happens is the bridge places those calls and acts as the intermediary device between those networks that are actually on the different campuses. A gateway is a device that connects dissimilar networks. A router, as I said, is a smarter version of a switch, and that it facilitates network traffic and assigning IP addresses. It's a smarter version of a switch, which in itself is a smarter version than a hub, a smarter version of a hub. A backbone is the main internet highway. A backbone doesn't necessarily have to be one of those 7 backbones that I told you about that facilitates traffic from across the entire internet. It could also be the physical cable or cables that facilitate network traffic in an intranet or extranet. Ethernet. Ethernet is the network standard for linking devices in a local area network, and it describes how data can be sent between computers and other network devices, usually in close proximity. Surely at this point you are comfortable and familiar with Ethernet cables, Ethernet cables would connect, for instance, to that cable modem that we saw a few slides back, and the Ethernet cable would connect to the back of the modem, and then if you were using a wired connection, it would connect into your computer. So if you've looked carefully at one of these, you've probably noticed that they are very similar to a phone cable, except that they have more, there's more wires inside of it, so it can carry more data. And here are some other types of wired connections. We have twisted pair wire for dial-up connections. As we said in a previous chapter, the longest mile from the internet service provider to your home is the twisted pair wire, in that everybody's home has this at the last mile or so, and of course it's the hardest for the ISP to go and clean up and make all those cables faster. And then the coaxial cable is analog insulated copper wire wrapped in a metal sheet and is used for cable TV and cable internet electronic signals. Surely you're familiar. If you use coax cable, for example, you've seen the coaxial jack on the wall. The coaxial hooks into the back of your cable modem, and then from there the Ethernet connects to your wireless router. I'm assuming you have a wireless router at home. This is 2015 after all. And then fiber optic cable sends tiny little impulses of light as zeros and ones, and of course for that reason it is by far the fastest wired connection. As you can see, it can transmit data up to 2 gigabits per second, which would be 2 billion bits per second, which is, as you can imagine, that's pretty substantial. It really kind of boggles my mind to think about 2 billion bits per second. That's just, it's incredible. And if you think a little bit further about that, if you think about Moore's Law and think about how much faster computers are getting all the time, it really is truly astounding. Well, where are we going to be in 2020, 2025? It's going to be instantaneous. It's only a matter of time, right? Eventually in our own lifetimes, surely we'll see such a thing. It's really, technology is just incredible. So anyway, that's fiber optic cables. A dozen or hundreds of thin strands of glass or plastic that transmit pulses of light, not electricity, of light that carries digital binary information in the form of zeros and ones. And then now here we talk more about analog, the electromagnetic spectrum. If you've ever taken physics in college or in high school, this should be familiar to you. It's the radiation that is the basis of all telecommunications signals, wired and wireless. As we said previously, the number of waves, the frequency of waves determines the frequency. So the more frequent the waves, the higher the frequency. So a very, very low, slow meandering wave would be something on the very bottom of the bandwidth scale, which would be like AM radio or something to that effect. And then nowadays, much faster, much higher frequency devices would be like cell phones or something like that. And the radio frequency spectrum, RF, is the part of the electromagnetic spectrum that carries most communications signals. So here are some examples. Like I said, way down here at the very bottom we have AM radio, and then up here at the top we get to some of those higher frequency devices. Here's the BlackBerry here, and then all the way up to 5.8 gigahertz, which is the newest cordless phones, and a little bit beneath that we see microwave ovens, 3G devices, etc., etc. You can peruse that graphic at your leisure. The next buzzword, the next keyword we will touch on is bandwidth, which is a range or band of frequencies that a transmission medium can carry in a given period of time. As we said, basically it measures the number of waves, and the more waves, the higher the frequency, right? So analog bandwidth is expressed in hertz. Now these are the two things. In analog, it's expressed in hertz, which is those number of waves, right? But digital bandwidth is measured in bits per second. So those are two of the same thing, only for analog and for digital, right? So we'll remember that come quiz time. Analog bandwidth is expressed in hertz, and digital bandwidth is expressed in bits, megabits, gigabits per second, but fundamentally bits per second. So narrowband, used for regular telephone communications, transmission rate of 1.5 megabits per second or less, which is very, very slow. And then we have broadband for high-speed data and high-quality audio and video, transmission rate of 1.5 megabits per second up to 1 gigabit per second or even more. So that's the difference between narrowband and broadband. Long-distance wireless and two-way communication, we talk here about different speeds of cellular service. 1G is, we didn't really even talk about 1G because it was just a G. It was just taken for granted that, okay, It is a wireless service, right? And then 2G, well, second generation, we'll start talking about that because it's twice as fast as first generation, right? And then 3G, well, everyone was very excited about 3G, and as we said just a few seconds ago, 3G is actually still the standard, and most devices connect to the 3G network. However, we now have 4G with LTE, which is long-term evolution, and that is the fastest for fastest internet surfing, because we all like our internet speeds to be piping hot and piping fast these days. We all expect it, even on our smartphones and other devices that 5-10 years ago we never would have expected to connect to the internet. So it says here that LTE supports data transfer rates of up to 100 megabits per second over cellular networks. Two-way communication, short-range wireless. Perhaps you are familiar with the 802.11 IEEE 802.11 standard, which is wireless. So IEEE is an electronics standard, basically. So a standard is, another example would be IEEE 1394 is the standard for FireWire. And then IEEE 1394A is FireWire 400, and IEEE 1394B is FireWire 800, for instance. So IEEE 802.11 is the set of standards that govern the transmission of wireless data. So 802.11a, 802.11b, 802.11g, and 802.11n are different speeds. So 802.11a is archaic and ancient and very, very old and slow. This would be the very, very first network cards. Would be 802.11a. They would be virtually unusable these days. In fact, I'd be willing to bet that most wireless networks wouldn't even be able to let them on. And then we have 802.11g, which is significantly faster. However, there's much faster than that now, which is N speed, and I think it's safe to say that pretty much all computers that you buy nowadays will have 802.11n, and nearly all wireless routers, I'm willing to bet your wireless router at home is an 802.11n. For a long time, G was the standard, and then N came out maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago, and since then, everything everywhere is 802.11n. So anyway, all you need to know about that is that 802.11n is a set of wireless standards for transmission of data through the air. Short-range wireless, so as we discussed briefly in a previous chapter, Bluetooth is definitely significantly faster than wireless transmission when you're 30 feet or less. Here it says 33 feet or less, but connecting through via Bluetooth is very fast, significantly faster than wired. However, once you step outside of that Bluetooth threshold, it no longer works. So obviously it's good for very close range transmission of data without wires. What's really kind of fun these days is with cell phones, if you have like a game or something like that, or you can even use Bluetooth to connect to someone else's cell phone and very quickly exchange photos, data, images, whatever it may be. So Bluetooth is a very cool technology. And it's interesting to point out, I don't expect you to actually care, but it turns out that Bluetooth was named after a king of Denmark around the year 1000. His father's name was Gorm of Old, and his son was named Bluetooth, and I forget his first name, but the Bluetooth standard is named after this king of Denmark. And the only reason I know this is because my grandfather did genealogy, and apparently I'm descended from that person. So Bluetooth was named after one of my ancient ancestors. I feel really cool about that, but it's not here nor there, but it's worth mentioning. Oh, and apparently his name was Bluetooth because he really liked blueberries. I also like blueberries, so there's a very strong family connection with me and Bluetooth. Moving on, here we have cyber threats, trolls, spies, hackers, and thieves. Very interesting stuff, especially in our modern era with the way things are working out on the internet right now. We have all sorts of different threats to worry about, and the threats that could come around are very scary, ladies and gentlemen. I don't want to get too into it right now, but there are a lot of things to fear on the internet. It is possible now for hackers to hack into our water and our power supplies, you know, and they cause some serious trouble. And so it's sort of an arms race, and that we have to stay ahead of those hackers, and we have to quickly get things patched as soon as they find holes, because it's no longer just, oh, I'm going to get into your information, I'm going to get into your email, and I'm going to access your private information. Maybe I'll order something on Amazon. It's actually because everything, all these devices are connected to the network these days. pretty much anything can be reached, and anything that can be reached through the internet can be hacked. Part of the problem is they're getting all of these devices that have been connected to the internet because obviously it's much more quick to access in the event of like an intranet or something like that. So you might have an intranet connecting a dam, and so different kinds of devices would be connected to that intranet. And at that time, the prevalence of hacking wasn't a huge risk. So when these devices were being set up, they might still have the default passwords. And that's what they're finding, is that these incredibly big and important but very dumb PLCs, program logic controllers, that control these very, very big type of functions that are connected to the internet, they have the default passwords still set up. So anybody who looks online and finds the owner's manual for one of these devices, and they know what type of a device they're targeting, can very easily ascertain the password and hack into that device. Hopefully you guys are all good and would never consider doing such a thing, but there's a giant push to get caught up here. The internet, it's growing, and the possibilities are growing so quickly, so that we have to get our defenses bolstered to match the new outside possible threats. Anyway, moving forward, the ongoing dilemma of the digital age is balancing convenience against security. Security consists of safeguards for protecting information technology against unauthorized access, system failures, and disasters that can result in damage or loss. Trolls. Trolls aren't necessarily destructive, but they can be disruptive and annoying on online comment boards. A troll is a person who intentionally posts offensive, incendiary, or off-topic comments to upset people. Why would trolls want to make people upset? Maybe because they're teenagers and it's kind of funny. I don't know. When I was a teenager, I was a non-online troll, and I'm willing to bet lots of other people were too. I would go ding-dong ditching. I mean, come on, let's be honest. Didn't we all try that? And perhaps prank calling, you know, before caller ID put a stop to all that. But anyway, so trolls are online versions of just merry pranksters, in that all they do is just annoy people and tick people off. So trolls are probably very, very, very low on our threat level for online threats. Perhaps a little bit more dangerous, or perhaps a higher level annoying, would be companies that use extensive data collection efforts to track our personal activities. I had a kind of scary situation recently where the interconnectedness of these companies online that spy on us and the different tracking software that they use, it was kind of eye-opening for me. I went to Walmart and I bought a different brand of underwear than I usually buy. And that same afternoon, my wife got an ad on Facebook for that specific type of underwear on Walmart, which is, I mean, that's just so, I have absolutely no idea how that could happen, to be honest with you, but there's really no doubt she's never seen that advertisement before. I've never purchased that brand of underwear before. So a little bit creepy, a little bit gross. When you think about all of the information that those people have on you, it's really kind of scary. And people say, well, they're benign, they're just trying to sell you things, but it kind of skews me out, ladies and gentlemen, because when you think about it, so all these companies know everything about you, everything you bought, everything you're interested in. They know all these things about you, and you can say, okay, it's benign. What are they going to do with that information? Well, how many companies are still in business 50 years later? What's going to happen to that treasure trove of data, that personal information about all of us? What's going to happen to that? Where is that colossal, unthinkably large database collection of all of that information going to wind up? I have my guesses. Maybe if you ponder that, you'll come up with some guesses of your own. It's scary, ladies and gentlemen. Be very careful what you share on the internet. The internet is not some magical fairyland where you go and you're anonymous anymore. No, 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 not at all. Every single thing that you or anybody else does on the internet can be tracked. There is a strand that follows you to wherever you, there are tools, obviously, that prevent this. Anyway, I'm getting carried away here, but just be aware that the possibility is there that every single thing that you do on the internet is being recorded and monitored. Maybe not actively by human beings, but it is very certainly being monitored. Malicious hackers. So these would fall under the category of black hat hackers, and that there are white hat hackers who hack for good. And it's actually it's interesting. We'll have white hat hacker conventions where a bunch of white hat hackers will get together. Maybe a company will say, look, we want to get all these white hat hackers together and show us where we're weak. We want you to attack our network and see where we need to get up, where our weaknesses are. And the white hat hackers will go, and they'll find those weaknesses, and then that's a good thing, in that that company can then bring their standards, their level of security up. So they point out the holes for people. Then we have the gray hat hackers, which are the really annoying ones who perhaps write malware or get malware onto your computer, tracking information, some other type of programs that could cause, they're not necessarily black hat, they're not super malicious, but they are really, really annoying. So in the worst case of gray hat hacking, you have information, or you have programs that are installed onto your computer to turn it into a bot. And then an individual computer is called a bot, and then a botnet is a group of computers all over the world. Any computer that has this malicious software installed on it becomes part of the botnet. And then the botnet master can use those computers to belch out spam or do all kinds of different, he can use that computing power as he wishes, and the owners of those computers probably don't even know what's going on. So script kiddies are the very, very beginning black hat hackers. So believe it or not, all of those, it's not, hackers don't necessarily write all of their evil code themselves. It's possible just to download these packages of malicious software. So a script kiddie would be someone who downloads a virus kit or something like that, and then changes a few things and then activates it. So a script kiddie is someone who doesn't necessarily write the code but still uses it for their nefarious purposes. A hacktivist would be someone who breaks into a system for political or socially motivated purpose. For that reason, they would think that they're probably in the right, but they may or may not be breaking the law. Black hat hackers, as we said, those are the evil ones who break into computers to intentionally steal or destroy information or to use it for illegal profit. And then a cyber terrorist is a stronger, more malicious version of a hacktivist. A benign hacker would be, this kind of reminds me of the Native Americans. You'd hear the stories about the Native Americans who would ride up to their enemies and then touch them and then ride away. And to them, that was the real challenge. That was the honor, was to be able to cause damage, to be able to kill, but then not. And so a benign hacker is sort of like that. For the thrill of it, they will break into that network and they will say, "Tag, I was here," and then they'll take back off into the sunset. And as we already said, white hat hackers are here at the bottom too. Networks and computer systems are susceptible to attacks by all kinds of malware. Duh, we've talked about that. Some of the different types of cyber threats are denial of service attacks, viruses, worms, Trojan horses, rootkits, and backdoors. Blended threats, zombies, ransomware, and time, logic, and email bombs. We're going to talk about each of those. A denial of service attack is perhaps one of those botnets. Botnets can get very large, up to about 500,000 computers for some of the ones that they found. And so those botnets can be used to turn all of their strengths onto targeting, I don't know, Wells Fargo's servers or something like that, and sending so many requests. It's called a DDoS attack, sending so many requests for information that it just completely shuts down the system. So that's a denial of service attack, by bombarding the server with so many requests that it just shuts down. Now, a virus is a deviant program, as it says here, that can be hidden in a file or a program on a disk. So a virus needs to be activated in some way. So it needs to be like an exe file or something like that, although it can be embedded in Flash, it can be embedded in a PDF document or something like that, but it requires, you must run or open it in that it is executable. So if someone emails you something and you open it, you can get a virus that way. There's also, flash drives can be infected with these things also. So a virus, once in, executes evil software to cause trouble. And that is distinctly different from a worm or a Trojan horse. So a worm is a program, a nefarious program that once onto your computer will copy itself relentlessly over and over and over again for the purpose of overwhelming and crashing the infected computer. A Trojan horse is a program that pretends to be happy and fun, but is really malicious and causes trouble to your computer. Oh, and backdoor and spyware programs allow others to access your computer without your knowledge by opening a backdoor that you are unaware of. Rootkit. These are hardcore. Rootkit viruses embed themselves above the operating system in such a way, so whether you're aware of this or not, on your operating system there is a level of administrator that can be activated called root, and the root operator has complete and total power. And it's even actually a bad idea, in many cases, to activate this super user, because once the root account is opened, it's possible for someone else to get in and control your system at the strongest level possible. So as you can see here, the kit is the malware secretly introduced onto the computer, and the root kit gives an attacker superpowers over the computers. Blended threats is a combination of one or more of those different types of cyber threats. As we said earlier, a zombie or bot is part of a botnet. Ransomware, as you can probably imagine, once installed, it demands a payment to be uninstalled or to release whatever information it is that it's holding hostage. Time, logic, and email bombs, I'm sure you can probably imagine the distinction between these. A time bomb is malware programmed to go off at a particular time. A logic bomb is detonated when a certain event takes place, perhaps when your computer user opens Microsoft Word or presses the D key, something like that, a logic bomb. I'm certain that the logic required would probably be something much more detailed than just pressing the D key, but you get the idea. So how are cyber threats spread? Via email attachments, by clicking on infiltrated websites, and as we said, flash drives also, downloading infected files from websites, but surely you guys aren't doing that, are you? So Pirate Bay is getting a lot of bad press these days, and I'm certainly not going to come to their defense, and that's not my purpose here, but I want to point out to you that pretty much everything that you download from a site like that will have some kind of virus, maybe not a virus, but almost certainly some kind of backdoor program or something. There will be some kind of negative malware included in those. So beware, whenever you download something illegally, you're introducing, I mean, what are you going to do, to go to the cops for help? No, absolutely not. So you need to be aware of that stuff. And they can also jump from one infected PC on a LAN to another. So maybe you aren't aware, but the Army had a lot of trouble with flash drives. And so now out there in the field, they don't actually allow, there's a no flash drive policy, and that different pieces of malware could be transferred so easily just by pumping it up, installing or plugging a flash drive into your computer is all it takes to pass a particularly nasty piece of malware from one place to another. However, luckily, it's easy enough to prevent these things by simply installing antivirus and firewall software on your computer. A free one for Windows. Don't feel like you need to have McAfee or Symantec or whatever. Windows Security Essentials is actually free. Microsoft finally realized that, hey, you know, there's a lot of negative stuff going on. I don't want to say anything bad about PCs because they are tremendously, tremendously useful computers. However, their architecture is much more open to attackers than a Macintosh computer is, and I'll explain to you why. It's a very simple reason. The Macintosh operating system knows exactly what it's going to be installed on. It's going to be installed on an iMac, it's going to be installed on a Mac Pro, it's going to be installed on a Mac Mini, it's going to be installed on a MacBook, something like that. It knows where it's going, it knows it doesn't need to have device drivers installed or anything like that because it's very familiar. Bundled in that operating system is everything that's going to need to function on any one of those platforms. However, the PC operating system, Windows operating system, there's so many different manufacturers of PC equipment with so many different devices underneath the hood. I mean, you got network cards and graphic adapters and all of these different things. It's impossible for Windows to ever bundle every possible combination with the Windows software. So it has to be, for that reason, wide open because so many different things have to interface with the Microsoft Windows operating system, where the architecture is different for a Mac. It's very cut and dry. It knows where it's going to be installed, and so there's a lot fewer openings. But the PC Windows has to be wide open. And so for that reason, that's why you find that the viruses and the malware are much more predominantly found on PCs, at least for the time being. So Windows has finally come to realize, look, we have to be providing free antivirus software because we're really taking a beating. Our users are getting lit up. So Windows, and more credit to them, Microsoft, more credit to them, they released free antivirus software that you can download. It's Windows Security Essentials, and in that Microsoft manages the updates themselves, it's much more up to date, and it's free. So if you haven't started using Microsoft Windows Essentials yet, you definitely should. Don't pay for antivirus software anymore. You don't want a third-party company. You want to go directly to the source. So there's really no reason not to be using Windows Essentials right now. Antivirus software, firewall, don't use the same password for multiple sites, duh. Don't give out your password information, duh. Hello, duh. So as we said previously in another lecture, passwords are cracked using brute force attacks, which is a software program that will try every possible combinations of letters, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, special characters, over and over and over and over and over again until finally it finds the correct combination. So each time it comes up against so it'll try every different combination of lowercase letters until it hits something that's not a lowercase letter, and then it has to start over again. So each time you go from lowercase to uppercase to special character, it takes it longer and longer and longer and longer and longer and longer and longer for it to actually crack. So as you can see here, for cats, not especially good, but for really fancy cats with the lowercase and then the numbers and letters and the special characters is much safer. So consider making your passwords more secure using a technique like that. And then biometric identification, as we discussed, would be like the eyeball scan or the fingerprint access. I remember I gushed about how excited I was for the fingerprint lock on my iPhone 5. I haven't lost that thrill. That's still really cool. But biometric identification is also a feature on PCs, and it will become more and more and more popular as passwords become less and less and less useful. As we've touched on Moore's Law many times, we can expect that computers will get faster and faster and faster and faster and faster and faster, and then at some point 20, 30 character passwords, even with all the different formatting styles that we talked about. Even then, the computers will be going so fast that every possible combination will be very quickly cracked. So biometric identification is one way that forward-thinking security researchers are coming up with as a new way to keep our data safe, and that passwords eventually will just not be relevant anymore. Encryption, as we touched upon, it basically turns your data into gobbledygook that can only be ungobbledygooked by the application of a specific key. So it uses an algorithm to totally randomize, using a very special key to totally randomize your data. And without that key, it can never be unencrypted. So it creates that very specific key, and that key is passed so that the receiver can unencrypt that data. And as I said, folks, so if you go to somewhere with an unsecured wireless network, please do not send. I've actually seen this happening in Starbucks before. It's so easy. I wouldn't recommend that you ever try this, but just Google packet sniffing program, and you will see that there's hundreds of packet sniffing programs, and what these do is these wait for unencrypted packets to fly through the air, and then they grab them. And then it's because they're unencrypted, the hacker who's just sitting there and just plucking them out of the air can read all that information. So you absolutely must. Don't go into a public network like Starbucks or the airport or something like that, any place where it's busy, and use an unsecured wireless network. Because the chances of somebody sitting there with a packet sniffing program and just plucking your unsecured packets out of the air is very high. There was this other phenomenon for a while called war driving. And people would drive around using packet sniffing programs and just hope to hit on unsecured networks and just pick up on any information they could that was being passed through them. Well, that brings us to the end of our lecture on communications, networks, and cyber threats. I can't tell you how much of a pleasure it was being with you this afternoon and discussing these things with you. Stay tuned for Chapter 7. Goodbye.